Okay? So, take these equations. If we multiply the first one by 3, we're going to get a 6 in front of x. If we multiply the second by -2, we're going to get a -6 in front of x, which means we're going to get rid of x. Now we can't just multiply the 2x by 2 and the 3x, or by 3 and the 2x, the 3x by -2. We've got to multiply both sides of the equation by the same number, otherwise we change the solutions of the equation. So we do 3 times the first equation. What I mean by that, and I've got a note over here, 3 times the first equation, which we multiply both sides of the first equation by 3. Okay, so what do? 3 times the first equation, therefore means 3 multiplied by this side. And I need these parentheses. There's a strong tendency just to write 3 with a 2x and then a plus 7y and no parentheses. And you no longer have a distributive law, you no longer have an equation that's going to be equivalent. So you really have to be careful that you multiply the whole side by 3 and write it that way, so you'll trigger yourself to use the distributive law. And then 3 times the other side. You can't, the equation becomes out of balance if you multiply one side by 3 and not the other. Okay? And then we use a distributive law. We get 3 times 2x and 3 times 7y. We get the 48. And that gives us 6x plus 21y equals 48. My h will get more and more like zeros. Okay, so that gives us the equation I've written down here. That's what we get when we multiply the first equation by 3. Now if we do the same thing to the second equation, multiplying both sides by -2, it's very easy to verify that this is what we get. So now when we add the equations, we get a 0 here, plus 31y equals 62, which is just 31y equals 62. Now we've got to know what operation to apply to both sides to solve for y. Otherwise, very easy to get stuck and do something wrong or not get the right thing. And what you have to do is you have to divide by 31. And of course, we have to understand fractions well enough to understand why 31y divided by 31 is just y. That's why we started out the whole course with fractions. That's why everybody really needs to review fractions. That and what's coming up in a couple of weeks. We've got to do fractions with more complicated symbolic expressions. So we have to really understand fractions, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore because we talked about it at great length. And you have recommended materials to review the fractions, so be sure you do. Okay, so anyhow, 31y divided by 31 is y, 62 divided by 31 is 2. So now we've got y equals 2. What do we do with that? What did we do before when we had the solution for x?
I'm so confused now.
Okay, if you don't have that in the notes that you wrote, you're going to want to add it. Don't add it right now. Just take a note. You got to plug that into one of these equations so you can solve for x. And of course, you got to practice by doing this a bunch of times. So anyhow, putting that in for x and then snaking our way back down here. That actually goes in for y. We get 2x plus 7 times 2 equals 16. So 2x plus 14 equals 16. 2x equals 2, x equals 1. But there are a lot of blanks that you need to fill in here so you know for sure what step you're taking every time. Like you got to put 2x plus 14 minus 14 equals 16 minus 14. If you don't do that step, you're not reminding yourself that you do the same thing to both sides. You have to do that. 2x equals 2, just like we did up here, we would write 2x divided by 2 equals 2 divided by 2. then we would get x equals 1. We have to write out all those steps because, again, if we don't, we're not going to reinforce the idea that there are just a few things we can do to both sides of the equation, and we're just playing a game. We've got like 3 or 4 rules. We apply those rules and we get to the solution. Okay, there aren't that many rules. You can add the same thing or subtract both sides. You can multiply or divide both sides by the same thing as long as you don't divide by 0. That's most of it. Then you got exponents. Okay? For these, you just you can add or subtract the same thing, multiply or divide by the same thing. Okay? And you can solve these equations. Right? But you got to write out all the steps. Okay? And I'm saying that mostly for anybody else that might want to look at this video. That's really important. And I see an epidemic of not writing out the steps and as a result getting solutions wrong from a significant number of people in the class at this point. Okay? So we have to keep reinforcing what we're doing. Otherwise we lose track of it. We've got to practice a lot.